protection of the natural environment, and then the Wildflower Society under a different name to know, grow and conserve wildflowers. And know means things like survey. If you look through, there's some other dates. There's the Australian Academy of Science and looking into national parks. The vegetation mapping by Beard started in 1965. And I'm not going to go through them all. I'll just go to 1977, where you can see that the natural history of the Wongan Hills was published by the Naturalist Club, an area still not adequately protected, and the Wildflower Society survey program in 1988, and in 1991 the Society's Flora Conservation Principles. I'm presenting it this way, along the same lines as the questions I asked, that you actually need a specific set of principles to actually assess something against. And we guide our society by a set of principles for flora conservation. And I would suggest that any organisation should do the same thing. Okay, so this is just to establish that the Wildflower Society has been long in this area and is well respected because of the science of the information we use and because we tend to be measured and considered. I don't always fulfil that. I sometimes get a bit too, I'm not always as respectful as I should be. Okay, the other thing I want to acknowledge is that the Wildflower Society has evolved in this way because of a series of key people. And these are not, most of you won't know these names because most of them are not alive anymore. But that group of people, now this lady's alive, that's Dorothy Perret, and so is this lady, that's Marion Blackwell. This lady down here is Eileen Croxford, and she's no longer with us. These people selflessly promoted the flora and were going to government and the community with the aim to help recognise and protect the full gamut of the flora from bushland right through to individual species. Okay, the principles of flora conservation. We touch on these 10 points. These were done in 1991, just after the survey program had begun. For survey, I go into some specifics. They're not all there. And I've underlined the two that I'm going under responsibility, which is something else that came up today, Malcolm mentioned. The levels of society, all levels, individual, community, government and corporate. We're responsible for this heritage of wildflowers that we have. And under botany, the systematic botanical surveying of our flora and vegetation is essential. And like I said, this is a responsibility of individual, community, government and corporate. You can see rare and endangered species and communities are in there, but they're way down the list because they never should be the central criteria for any way. It's the common that conservation and preservation of biodiversity is about. We do this threatened as a bit extra. Okay, now the reason I'm using this as an example is because of the vacuum, this has become a very significant project, not because it collects data, but for a number of other reasons we'll see as we go through. Okay, it's a public involvement survey and was done before we learned about citizen science. People join the group at their own cost, go lots of distances at their own cost, at their own accommodation, to add to the information about our flora and vegetation. They see it as their responsibility. How it started in a lot of ways was because people wanted to look at the bushland, but actually contribute information to the knowledge of our bushland. So it's an understanding of survey through practice. We demonstrate best practice. We have botanists supporting the groups, and this is of interest, and we published our outcomes. This was the aims right from the beginning. And here we are. It started in 1988. You'll recognise Malcolm here. This is Ted Griffin, who's talking to you tomorrow. I don't know if he's here today. and this is me. And these 4 people here, sorry, it's more than those ones in the front there, they joined the survey in 1988 when it first started. The 2 on the left are still coming to survey sessions. The next 2 aren't, but it's 30 years since we started this survey project. Okay, the emphasis is on communities, not on individual species. Well, it isn't, anyway. We'll get into that in a minute. But this is an interesting slide because this is Yanchep National Park. Well, sorry, the Yanchep National Park Bush Forever site. I'm not sure it's actually been added yet, even though it was supposed to be added a long time ago. This is a threatened ecological community. None of this was threatened ecological community in the past, but this is how situation has changed. Here's Chewett Woodland, that's been looked at the moment, and in the background, Banksia Woodland, which on the Swan Coastal Plain is a threatened ecological community now. All right, people in reading environmental impact assessment, sometimes you get the idea that people have problems with quadrats. Set areas to describe. According to these people, we have groups of an 80-year-old lady here and younger people, or hopefully, and younger still, coming and doing the survey and have absolutely no problems with quadrats. They see it as a guidance for them to actually pick up that type of bushland. All right, as part of this project, the book was funded, the production of the Bushland Plan Survey book. Now, we called it A Guide to Paint Community Survey for the Community. Now, mostly we just called it Bushland Plan Survey. The techniques were trialled, as it says there, and they're part of this booklet has been taken in as part of the DBCA's Standard Operating Procedures. So it's in one of the vegetation survey. We present in the book these 3 series of base data sheets. Many people use these, many people adapt them, and these were drawn up. That's my drawings of the trees. This was done before computers, and it was literal cut and paste at that time. These 3 sheets are good standards. We've changed them more than 10 times. This particular version has room for the NVIS system, and it also has room for the layers that we present in the actual booklet itself. And our argument always is that if you have the documents to go with this information, the description of the vegetation units, that's what you need more than to follow any particular type. It's just that it needs to go into a database for the NVIS, and that puts it into a category. Okay, we've had a lot of people involved in these projects. Here is Neil Gibson, and you've heard about Malcolm mentioned Gibson et al. This morning. There's Greg Keary, and now Margaret Langley. Greg was the contact person because it's a volunteer project with the department, and then it's now Margaret because Greg's retired. Now, one thing to look in here is the information. Like I said at the beginning, we published our information. The survey goes back before good databases. Well, about the time when they were just beginning and were quite cumbersome at times, but as much as we can, we've put vouchers into the herbarium, so they're in Flora base, and we've contributed much of the information to Nature Map. And we actually have a project at the moment contributing some more. Okay, we've had lots of people involved as botanists and leaders, and you can see Malcolm again there, same picture. And today, here, we've got Judith Harvey in the audience, and Hes Kelly, who's worked for the Wildflower Society as well. One of the things we do is we recognise that you need to develop your educational skills. So, this one shows a group on survey, doing survey work, but also for identifying plants. But for the last about 20 years, I think, a group meets on Wednesdays at the State Herbarium and actually can look at the specimens in the herbarium and work together to identify the material. Now, I'm just going to mention briefly some of the difficulties that people who are interested and trained have in the bushland. These are people without specific botanical training, but have been working in the bushland, as you saw, some of them for more than 30 years. They have trouble locating the different communities and putting the quadrat in. And consultants have the same problem at times, not being able to distinguish the communities and putting them in the interfaces between communities, which confuses the analysis if it's not done carefully. Vegetation condition is another. Now, vegetation condition evolved from a report that Malcolm had done, and we put a vegetation condition scale into the Bushland Survey book. Those sorts of conditions are easy, the difference between excellent and pristine, but these are the ones that people find difficult. It's the scales in between. The information from the surveys has gone into these regional data sets that we've talked about, and here the region is defined as the Southern Swan Coastal Plain. The Witcher Scarp survey as well. Now, outcomes and lessons. Okay. The program has trained botanists. We've had many of the, well, I'm not sure, how many people here have been to a bushland plant survey training course? Not as many as, we haven't run one for a few years, so perhaps it's time to run another one. The last workshop we ran had 2/3 practitioners and 1/3 volunteers, and we charged an amount that's able, and it actually is the money that we used to support this project. We have a community understanding of vegetation survey, which, if these people without formal training can do that, it should be able to be understood by others, but we know it's still difficult. They develop concepts, good concepts, but with some weaknesses in plant communities, vegetation condition and identification. And I've mentioned contributing to regional data sets. It's good quality, and one of the things is that good quality data, no matter what form it's in, on paper or in a database, but ideally databases should be supported by a paper copy somewhere. Papers pass the test of time. Electronic databases have not. So if you follow our history, a paper set somewhere in a library is what you need to maintain. And it empowers individuals in our group to act and do survey themselves. A number of people from our group have then gone on to do surveys without the support of the whole group. One of the reasons that we started this survey program was we got so many requests for information on a patch of bushland that they could then use to argue for protection of that patch. One of the things we have noticed, you do need some botanical support, because in the field for things like locating quadrats, for identifications and the analysis of data, because there are specialists in each of those areas, there are specialists in the different areas. We've got good quality based regional data sets, you need that as well, so you can look up information and understand it. And remember that databases are cumulative and they grow, but if they're not maintained, and the people that understand the data sets don't understand those data sets, then they're not of much use at all. These ones are the other ones that have come from this. Because our group understands the complexity of flora and vegetation survey, they understand the necessity of experienced people in the particular area an impact assessment document might be in, understanding the local and regional.
I've got quite a big voice. What you basically need access to people who have had that experience over a long period of time generally to understand local and regional significance. Most of the people who have these skills will give this advice on a volunteer basis. Now that's fine in a voluntary program like the Wildflower Societies, but when it comes to environmental impact assessment, their decision-making body, advisors, their staff, such as we've got several here today, and from the other groups, should be able to have access to people with that information. Also, there should be sufficient people employed with enough knowledge to know who to ask in environmental impact assessment. In my history, I spent 17 years in the group in the environment of the EPA that looks at the documents. Never did we have enough staff, even when we had 3 times the amount that are there now. And by having someone as the expert, and I was expert on the Swan Coast Plain, I could immediately see the adequacy of the document, not by looking at the base data. Even the Flora list would tell you, if there weren't lamandras on it, it was no good. So and this is specific for every area. So what needs to be set up for good environmental impact assessment is
yes, thank you, is access to a series of experts, and not on the experts' whims, but actually be able to employ them in some way. The next bit, when I talk about experienced botanists' role in monitoring and evaluation, it just doesn't happen. Not 2 years in my 17 years history were the end products of clearing and revegetation, the retention, all of those things, they were only for 2 years were they adequately followed up. And that was the beginning of a process which was found too difficult and left. But I'll just finish with this second last slide. This is, at the moment, as I said before, Tuart communities are being considered for threatened ecological community. This book we did, a Wildflower Society symposium, came out in the early 2000s, in paper, is the best data source still for the Tuart woodlands. And lastly, I want to thank all the botanists and the community people who love the flora as I do. And I just want to dedicate this to a survey person that some of you will know, Sandra Dunn in that circle, or she was Sandra Santich, who died a couple of years ago. Thank you.
Firstly, I'd like to thank Bronwyn for putting up with the technical issues we had. Really appreciate it. Are there any questions for Bronwyn? I might just head to the back.
Just a very quick question. You mentioned the Tuart workbook. Where can we get a hold of that?
You have a copy?
Sorry?
You have a copy? As a volunteer, I went out with the group from the Commonwealth and arranged a field trip for them, and they had access to that book, I understood. But if you need another copy, I can probably arrange for that.
That would be great. Thank you very much.
Maybe time for one more quick question if there is one.
Your next surveys are going to be?
We want to. There's a whole series of things at the moment, because Greg and I have changed life a bit. we are looking at consolidating the databases and getting them all onto the data collections we've got over the years and getting them onto Nature Map. We also are going to apply for some funds with one of the people that was in one of the slides in the Bunbury area to write up the Bunbury area, because that was one of the things that government was doing, but those projects are all cancelled. So we're going to try and finish that. But along the lines, Greg and I did a report on the flora of the western suburbs, and in that document we were able to look at the historic collections and records for all the reserves, and then look at what had been lost. So, and it wasn't only about rare flora, there was one globally extinct species, but in that area we'd lost a number of the important common species that underlie all of the communities in the western suburbs. So there's a focus. Anyway, we did that report which showed that, and we would like to do the same thing within the Bunbury one. So we would report on the communities, all the different levels of which you should use when you're looking at a local or regional area. One of the things I just say about this document is the beginning of it, in the current understanding at the time of local and regional significance, I wrote a paper in it to demonstrate how you go for a community. Okay, this was about Chewett and the communities it's in. I wrote a paper that went through about conserving the species and conserving the communities that were associated with that species, because Chewett's an iconic swan coastal plain species. So that's a good demonstration of how you can look at local and regional data sets that are available and that you're aware of. All right? So that's, even though it was from 2000 basically. Anyway, that's a digression.
Just a quick question, Bronwyn. I wondered if it's possible to access the most recent recording forms, the three famous recording forms.
They're in the current version of the book.
Right.
I could bring some of them tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
I've got one question for you, like I asked. Is there one thing that we can do differently from the Wildflower Society's perspective on surveys?
You can have base paper sheets for all of your surveys and lodge copies of them in libraries, as well as the data sets.
Sorry, Bronwyn, it's partly a comment, I guess, about where we're going. And there are two sides to these sorts of things. It's very important to have publications because people can pick them up. Having those things said, having the pictures, all that enables you to get it in your head. You know, you can see stuff. Databases are hard because there's a lot of work involved, but databases enable you to make better assessments, classifications, but if you push the envelope a bit, you then can say, we can take the vegetation, the flora lists, we can model the distribution of groups, and with the amount of data that's available for somewhere like the Swan Coastal Plain, by comparing the vegetation and flora data with underlying geomorphology soil, you can get a very much better idea of what was where, how much was lost, and the value of what remains. And this is the critical part of it. How do you move from idiosyncratic arguments of where do we find the data, how important it is, to actually be able to make a mathematical assessment? And that's the science of it, and that's where the science of it has to go, or frankly it's just triage on the eventual death of the lot of it. You know, you can look at the southern Swan Coastal Plain south of Perth, and it's a conservation disaster area. There's almost nothing there except on the Quindala that isn't highly threatened. Most of it's not considered to be threatened by current classifications because the proper analyses have not been made. And this is the crux of it. and we are far behind the game from where we should be. The database that I have stuck my data in was offered to government in about 2004 to give to all consultants to enable standardised data to be collected and exchanged and built into a massive database. If that had been done, we'd have 40, 50,000 sites for the state. We're behind the game. We have to look at all the components and integrate it.
I did not say that databases were not useful.
I'm not saying you did wrong.
But I just still add, put a paper copy somewhere as well. So it's not.
Always do.
I will add one thing. If you use regional criteria, the whole Swan Coastal Plain remnant vegetation should be protected, and there should be no developments in naturally vegetated land.